Welcome back to the show. We are fueled by Hattie B's Hot Chicken. It's our great pleasure to be joined for the first time on the show by Stewart Mandell of The Athletic. You can read all the work that he and his colleagues do covering the world of sports journalism at theathletic.com. And his latest, the arrogance of the Big Ten and SEC leaders on full display in New Orleans at the college football meeting. So when I was out on Monday, there was some news to the effect of the Big Ten and SEC building momentum to continue to further expand the college football playoff to 14 or 16 teams, not next year, but in 2026. And Stewart, one of several people that has offered impassioned opinions about the Big Ten and SEC. Let me know if I'm mischaracterizing this, Stewart. Have they essentially threatened to take their ball and go home if they don't get their way? Because it reads like they're kind of petulant children in the middle of all this.
Yeah, really, that happened a year ago when all parties agreed to this new ESPN contract that begins in 2026. That's exactly what happened. They basically came into the room and said, you're gonna give us more of the revenue. You're gonna give us effectively veto power, or we can change the format without your opinion, without your permission. And I think the other conferences felt like they didn't have a choice. And so now that they do have that, that unilateral ability to make changes to the format, well, now the next step will be implementing changes that favor those two conferences even more than they already do.
I guess the question is, not do they deserve it, because obviously their product carries the most weight in the scope of not just football but basketball and major collegiate athletics across the board. But is this the right decision? And if not, why?
What it is it's unnecessary. Those two conferences are going to get around 8 bids between them every year. If you under the current format with the selection committee determining most of those teams, when you put it in writing ahead of time, first of all, just last year the SEC only got 3, so you're saying we deserve 4 whether it's a good year for the conference or not, and you're also just giving the perception that it's not a fair system, that it's a system that preemptively favors two conferences over all the others. And they just really don't need to do that. If you just kind of let the games play out, more often than not, like I said, those conferences will produce most of the majority of the playoff teams in whatever size field you want to make. And they will probably win the most games as well, as we saw this past season, without having to put it in writing.
It's just frustrating. Stewart Mandell of The Athletic here with us on 104.5 The Zone. You can check out his latest piece on potential college football playoff expansion at theathletic.com. I'm wearing not ironically or anything like that, but I just happen to put on an Indiana hoodie today because it's my alma mater, and it's the first time that I've ever had any reason to have any interest in my football program ever, which is basically the entire state of Indiana, Stewart. And I looked at the way that the college football playoff played out this year, and yeah, there's some stuff with the seeding that could afford to be tweaked, and as I think you articulated it in your piece, some very fixable issues that the first iteration of the 12-team playoff had. But on the whole, I just thought it was such a success. Like, it accomplished what I thought it was supposed to accomplish, and I almost never say that about sports expansion.
Yeah, and Indiana was the poster for that. When they first decided to go to 12 teams back in 2021, it wasn't because, the way we determine the national champion isn't good enough. Honestly, one of the best team in the country was almost always one of those 4 teams. It was that so much of the country was left out. And I think people got tired and it got stale of watching Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, every year. Georgia, that small select group of teams. And so what this did was allow a program like Indiana or SMU or Arizona State, right, to have a moment in the sun, just like in the March Madness. Like, nobody is under any delusion that, you name it, Loyola is going to win the national title. But if they get in and win a couple games, it's a huge story. And that's what this allowed for. And so it's just incredible to me that after 1 year of it, before most people have even had a chance to absorb it and get used to this new world, we're going to blow it up and change it again.
Don't let him fool you, Stewart. Buck took no glee out of Indiana's run, and in fact rooted for Notre Dame in that first-round matchup against Indiana. So
you cover collegiate athletics for a living. Would you not say that you run into more Notre Dame football, Indiana basketball fans in the state of Indiana than Indiana football fans?
You definitely run into more Indiana basketball fans. You would know better than me about Notre Dame, because Notre Dame like those people don't all live in Indiana, right?
Yeah, that's
Notre
true.
Dame people graduate and move all over the country. But it was fun about that is that of those 4 first round games, by far the most expensive tickets were to the Indiana Notre Dame game, because it was like, if you're an Indiana football fan, this is like your once in a lifetime chance to see them in a game like this.
Yeah, most Indiana fans did not betray their alma maters. This one certainly did.
I did.
Besides the point, Stewart, as we've been wandering in the desert here for the last few years, and I understand the frustrations here in terms of what the SEC and Big Ten are doing, but wasn't there kind of this feeling of inevitability that the two properties with this disproportionate amount of power in the sport were going to grapple control at some point just because they can and because nobody else is?
Yeah, I mean, they kind of already have. And I thought last season, in the regular season, you really saw that in terms of, that was also the first year of the SEC's new deal with ESPN, where they can play their games on ABC. And I did not anticipate ABC would just put 3 straight SEC games on almost every week. And it was like all the ACC teams and the Big 12 teams almost like were playing on a side stage, turn into ESPN2 to see your team. So they've already basically taken over the regular season. And I get that. Like, those are the games people want to watch. They want to watch Georgia play Texas. They want to watch Ohio State play Oregon. I get it. The playoff is like, keep using the NCAA March Madness analogy, where you get to see these teams that maybe you didn't. I don't think most people watched Arizona State play once all season, and they got into the Peach Bowl against Texas, and you got to see Cam Skattebo deliver this all-time great performance. Now, they would tell you in this new format they're proposing, they'll still get that chance. In fact, the Big 12 is going to get 2 automatic berths if this goes through. And I get that. Again, I just think you're undermining the credibility of your tournament. Like, what other sport does that? Like, the NFL doesn't say before the season the NFC East is definitely going to get more teams than the AFC East. Like, it's just unheard of.
So as we continue this incremental growth going from 4 to 12 and potentially 12 to 14 or 16, whatever that next step will look like in 2026, what do you think is more likely, Stewart, that we just get a fixed 14 or 16 team format in 26 and that's what we do moving forward, or that we go with 14 and then maybe adjust it from there? Like, what is your hunch on what exactly this will look like in the immediate future between 14 and 16 teams?
I think the history of the college football postseason is they're always tinkering with it, right? So whether they go ahead and go to 16 now or start at 14, it'll get to 16. Like, that's just inevitable. I think they might start at 14 because it's more modest, but also there's this assumption that they just keep adding games and ESPN will just keep throwing money at them. And I don't know if that's the case. I mean, we saw this past year, two of the first round games went up against big NFL games. And so that raised a whole question of, well, is there a better time to play these games, and questions about the schedule. So now you're saying in a 14-team playoff, we're going to have 6 first-round games. Where are you going to play those other games? So I don't know that ESPN, is dying to expand the playoff already. Now, if the conferences decide that's what they want to do, obviously ESPN will accommodate them. But I don't think this is a case of, all parties are necessarily on board with this.
Well, it's just Stewart Mandell of The Athletic here with us on 104.5 The Zone. You can read him online at theathletic.com. Well worth your subscription, not just for Stewart, but for all the great journalism being done there. We talk a lot about the NFL. Nashville is primarily a pro market, but obviously SEC country, so we spend a great deal of time talking SEC football as well. And the salary cap in the NFL just went up. I mean, over the course of the last 2 years, $53 million in total. It spiked again. The NFL, continuing to pursue streamers, international live broadcast rights, and the different kinds of money that they can consume as they continue to try and expand. It's just so interesting to look at college football in a similar light. Because my question for you is, as somebody who's a lifer essentially in this industry, covering this sport, like, what is their end game here?
In terms of how much money they can make?
What is their growth? Yeah, I guess that's at the crux of the question. Like,
I think what's driving this particular round is the revenue sharing, that if the House settlement gets approved in April, now these schools need to come up with $20.5 million to pay their athletes directly that they didn't have to before. And so they're kind of turning over couch cushions and looking for any penny they can. As I said in that column, I think Tony Petitti and the Big Ten's goal of this is once they have established that there's going to be 4 Big Ten teams in, then they can create their like own little NBA play-in tournament for those 4 spots or for 2 of those 4 spots and sell that to Fox or CBS and make money. And you look at the Big Ten, you go, you guys are already making $1 billion a year in TV money. How much more do you need? But to your point, right? And they would say, well, because of a court settlement, we have to pay an extra $20 million. We got to find that somewhere.
He's Stewart Mandell. He'll continue to do excellent coverage for The Athletic about the world of college football. Read him online at theathletic.com. You can follow him on Twitter at SL Mandell. Stewart, thanks so much for hopping on the radio show for the first time. We hope it won't be the last. It's great information.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That's Stewart Mandell with us on 104.5 The Zone. It's a really interesting column. The story in general, Ross Dellinger, I think, is at the forefront of a lot of the news breaking in the world of the college football playoff expansion, and he is who had the initial report on Sunday afternoon, I guess Sunday evening, about the SEC and Big Ten continuing to basically put their foot down on, no, it's our thing, and we're going to direct this thing the way that we feel like it should go. And at the end of the day, are they right? Yes.
Yeah, that's my thing. We've been desperately asking for somebody to take control in some sort of way. And I get the arguments against, especially after a year where the SEC only got 3 teams in. But then you had the likes of Indiana and SMU getting blown out in the first round. And that's not to say the SEC would have done any better. SEC undefeated in hypothetical matchups. We know this. But another thing I like about it is conference championships feel like they'll matter more again.
Oh, so you like this?
I like this more than I dislike it. Like, I understand the frustrations.
You'll bring that up with Stewart.
No, but my whole point with Stewart, too, was there was a feeling of inevitability with this.
Oh, sure.
Like, we've just been waiting for this to happen, so I'm not outraged by it. And I get his argument of if the NFL said, well, the NFC East pulled in this much cash last year, so they will get, their top 2, not just the division winners guaranteed, top 2 in the NFC East.
Imagine.
But college football is not the NFL, right? And it's a mistake to try to make college football as much like the NFL as possible because people don't watch the NFL because of the format. They watch it because it's the best football players on the planet playing in the same league. People that love college football or people that don't love college football aren't going to love it more because the format copies the NFL. So I don't think following that line of thinking gets you anywhere, but I understand his frustration. A lot of people look at that and say, of course, SEC could have a down year and still get 4 teams in just automatically because they make all the money. But it's just kind of a statement of where college football is right now and how directionless it is to where the 2 most powerful pieces of the puzzle said, okay, then we're going to do this.
Yeah, you got a void. And Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti filled in that void. They're saying, no, we have the most powerful properties here. We have the strongest entities. Yes, we acknowledge that maybe the SEC and the Big Ten won't have the best season every year for the rest of time, but under Greg Sankey, it's rare to see the SEC take a step back in terms of the level of competitiveness of the teams at the top of the field that they're perpetually putting out there. It is the best football in the country from top to bottom, and I know the Big Ten has a more compelling argument lately, but still, it's still, I'm not going to say it pales in comparison with the national champion coming out of the Big Ten this year, but how many years did it take us to get a Big Ten national champion between the last time the Ohio State won in the first iteration of the college football playoff?
As fun as the debate was on what's the committee going to do now, right? It was also extremely frustrating to watch them move the goalposts around. So I don't mind there being an official, all right, if you do this, you're in. If you don't do this, you're out. And we don't have to sit there and argue about strength of schedule and all of these things. If you finish in the top 4 in the SEC and the Big Ten, you're in. Same with the top 2 in the Big 12. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Top 2 in the ACC. And then we figure out the at-large, whether it's 14 or 16, 1 or 3 at-larges. So there will be some debate, but not so much to the point of parsing through Miami or Alabama based on just a total uneven playing field because their schedules are completely different and it's just an imperfect science.
All right. The salary cap is expected to go up at least $22 million, according to Dan Graziano of ESPN. We can talk about that coming up next, what it means for the Titans and potential other team dominoes that Titans fans might be paying attention to. I'm Buck Reising. It's 104.5 The Zone.